there. It's, just because I think the main thing is like go out there, take action, fail. You need that to build the character to actually have your big successes.
Yeah.
And I think I feel like that's probably the thing that's missing most in the world today. When
One of my, again, not a question you asked, but one of my favorite profiles of, hiring a talent and building an A team is to hire failed entrepreneurs. So that they have if they're a failed entrepreneur, I know that they have a risk tolerance that they're willing to take risks, because to put yourself out there as an entrepreneur takes a lot.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways. The fact that they failed, I hope, means they learned something and they're hungry to prove that they have it.
Yes.
And so I remember multiple times, and I've worked with recruiters, and I've said, look, I want to find a failed entrepreneur to lead this effort.
Yep.
Sometimes one of my other favorite interview questions when I'm interviewing someone is, on a scale of 1 to 10, how lucky are you? Sometimes I've found entrepreneurs just seem to continue to fail. They can't quite figure it out. But it's hopefully they're learning along the way, and finding people who look at the world as like they view themselves as lucky and likely to get lucky are the kind of people that
I think they do become self-fulfilling prophecies.
Totally.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I like that a lot. Curious for you. This is a kind of a broad question. We talked about this a little bit, but like, it's always interesting to understand your mental models and what you would want for the world. So I'm curious for you, if you could get the whole world to believe one thing that you deeply believe yourself, what would you want the world to believe?
Well, this is a little bit do as I say, not as I do, because I want to believe and internalize this more, but understanding that your happiness is not dependent upon someone else's happiness, I think is super critical to the world. I think too often we're too worried what other people think. I think one of the great, viruses of life is things like Instagram, because we're comparing ourselves to, other people all the time. And, comparison is the thief of joy. And for me, if people better understood your happiness is not dependent upon everyone else's happiness, I think that would be good. And I'm not saying that I'm perfect at that.
Yeah.
I try. I try to remember that sometimes, but we're all works in progress.
That's good. I feel like a lot of our best advice that we give to other people is just the advice we also need for ourselves.
Exactly. That is absolutely true.
Like I'll write like a post on LinkedIn or something to go inspire people. I'm like, shit, I needed that.
Yeah. But that's good. That's a good thing to recognize as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Before I ask my last question, where can our listeners engage with you online?
The main one for me is Twitter.
Okay.
B Garling now at B Garlinghouse. I'm semi-active. I tend to be a one-trick pony. Well, two-trick pony. One is I tweet about crypto. I tweet about what's going on, to some degree Ripple, but also stuff outside of Ripple, just the crypto industry. The second one is I'm a rabid fan of the Kansas Jayhawks. I'm a graduate of the University of Kansas, and best basketball coach on earth, Bill Self. Anyway, those are the only two things I really tweet about.
So if you want info on those two topics,
you should follow me. Otherwise,
Brad is the #1 account on those two topics. Awesome. Well, for me, the name of the show is World Class. And I think when I think about that, I think about being a world-class human, being world-class in your craft, and just living a world-class life. And for me, I think the core of that is really just seeking growth and expansion. I think that comes from always seeking your next level, not from a place of lack, but from a place of wanting to become more as a human while we're still on this planet. So for you, despite everything you've done so far, building Ripple, operating companies, for you, what do you feel like your next level looks like personally?
I think it's understanding, that success is measured not by bank accounts and size of companies exclusively. It's understanding that success is about the impact you have on people's lives and the interactions you have and the people you touch. I get immense joy, frankly, as a dad, but also in seeing like the next generation of leaders, both inside Ripple and those that I get to interact with outside of Ripple, and kind of bringing them along and helping them along their journey. That's a lot of success for me now, which Probably I didn't understand as well how much joy that would bring in my 30s and 40s when I was kind of just work. I was working insane hours. And then you get there, you achieve, success in the kind of maybe more financially capitalistic driven measures. And you kind of realize like, I want something more. And it is a little bit like, how are you putting your dent in the universe? And there's a lot of ways to do that. And some of the people I admire most are not necessarily the people that are the traditionally defined most successful people. That people are like, wow, they have, they've chosen a path less traveled.
I love that, man. Yeah, I think you graduated on the soul evolution of like, well, okay, I've made a lot of money. I've had a lot of financial success. I've had the status, but now it's like, all right, how can I maximize my impact?
Yeah.
I love that, man. Well, this has been fascinating. I just want to commend you for being courageous, and like going through some real shit and staying in your path and paving the way for an industry really, and being one of the forefront leaders. And just, I think I'll use the word hero because I think heroes for me pursue their own principles in the face of all adversity, with a noble intention. So I think you've done some pretty heroic stuff and learned a lot today.
I take that as a huge compliment. I appreciate it. I don't know if I would call myself like I don't hold myself in that level.
I know you don't, but I think I can give you that. I think like with integrity.
I appreciate it immensely.
So thank you so much for sharing, man. I know people are going to love this.
Thank you.
Awesome. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed this episode of the World Class Podcast. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe across all our platforms. Hit that notification bell so you can get updates on our new episodes, and we'll see you next week.
The US dollar has been devalued through inflation by over 90% in the last 50 years. There are waves of technology that happen where there's amazing tailwinds of value creation and opportunity.
Brad Garlinghouse, the CEO of Ripple Labs, a blockchain payment solutions company.
If you're not taking risk, you're dying. If we're not failing a little bit, we're not trying hard enough.
What are some of the nuggets you've discovered on how to actually attract and land A+ talent?
A players want to put their dent in the universe. You can't get them with money. One of my favorite profiles of hiring A talent is to hire failed entrepreneurs.
9 years in probably the most volatile industry we've ever seen. What has been the highest high and what's been the lowest low for you?
If you go back to when we got sued, it was a pretty dark time at Ripple. Learning that we had won all the things that we cared about, not just for Ripple, but for the industry, that was a big high.
If you could get the whole world to believe one thing, what would you want the world to believe?
Comparison is the thief of joy. Understanding that your happiness is not dependent upon someone else's happiness is super critical to the world.
Any predictions you have in the next cycle? Oof. What is up, guys? Welcome back to the World Class Podcast. Today, I sit down with legendary executive and crypto pioneer, Brad Garlinghouse. Brad is the CEO of Ripple Labs, a blockchain-based payment solutions company with a market cap north of $26 billion. Prior to Ripple, Brad was the CEO at Hightail, president at AOL, and senior executive at Yahoo. And in this interview, we really dive into his turbulent story, leading Ripple through lawsuits into success. We talk about how to build a world-class team and company culture, the importance of taking risk, as well as Brad's predictions for the crypto market in the future. So without further ado, let's dive in. Hey, Brad, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good to be here.
I'm excited, man. So we have a lot of stuff to cover here. You've had an incredible career as a Web 2 executive, some of the biggest companies out there, Yahoo, AOL, and then you took an unprecedented move for most people. And I think 2015, you joined Ripple.
Yeah.
Before it was the cool thing to do, before anyone knew that crypto would be what it is today. Can you walk us through like what evidence did you find that gave you the conviction to pivot out of Web 2 into crypto in 2015 before it was the smart thing to do?
Well, I will start by sharing a brief anecdote that I think you'll get some humor out of. You probably know a guy who also now lives here in Miami named Mike Arrington. And Mike Arrington has been a friend for a long time. And he said to me, he's like, Brad, in a long string of bad professional decisions, going to Ripple is your worst. He literally, when I took the job, he was like, what the hell are you doing? And I'll say, there were a whole bunch of people in crypto who I really, at that time, even in 2014, 2015, when I was thinking about this, who frankly advised me against it. You know, for me to answer your core question, like I think there are waves of technology that happen that tend to last, let's call it 20 years, where there's amazing tailwinds of value creation and opportunity. I finished business school in 1997, which was an amazingly good time to come out of business school, given the birth of the internet, kind of in the really the 1.0. And not surprisingly, perhaps, there's a whole bunch of people from my business school class doing really interesting things in crypto, not the least of which is the CEO of Amazon, the guy named Andy Jassy. And I feel like one of the waves that is unfolding now is crypto and blockchain. I thought that 10 years ago. I had been exposed to Bitcoin in about 2012, and I owned some Bitcoin. But one of the things I always had this in my head is it's like, okay, wait a minute. Are we really going to rebuild the entire system devoid of government, devoid of banks? And I felt like that was a limiting factor. And so when I first heard about what Ripple was trying to do and trying to be really a bridge between traditional finance and what we're calling Web3 today, I thought, okay, this makes a lot of sense. And so the last thing I'll say about this, and I'll turn it back to you, but I also think risk tolerance is an important thing to think about in life. And at different times in your life, your risk tolerance should be higher or lower. It depends on who you are, what's going on in your life, all those things. By the time in 2015, I had been working in the tech space for 18 years. I had done well, and I had an opportunity actually to go work at Uber. And this is 2014, 2015, and that would have been a good outcome. Meaning, I felt like, okay, I don't know if they were public yet, but it was right around that time, and I felt like, okay, that's going to be a good base hit, maybe a double. But is that going to change my life in any real way? And I was at a point where was willing to take risk. And I thought, the likelihood that what Ripple's doing is going to be successful is probably pretty low. But if it worked, the returns and the opportunity to have an impact was much, 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 much higher.
That's a great way of thinking about it. We just talked about that with Elon too, with SpaceX and some of his ideas. It's like those asymmetric returns, you have to have a higher risk profile. And I think he mentioned there's like a 10% chance SpaceX would actually succeed, but he said the work was so important to drive the world forward that I just had to do what was required. So you're at that unique inflection point. What, I guess for those who don't know as well, like what exactly is Ripple?
Yeah.
And why do you think Ripple is so important in the future of crypto?
So I'm going to go back to how Ripple was kind of envisioned way back in 2015 when I joined. And the whole thing came to fruition. I got a recruiting call. And I, frankly, was avoiding the recruiter for a while, and a guy I like, but I say I was busy. I wasn't. I was driving for Uber at the time, just getting bored. But
driving from Uber.
But his point to me is like, look, Brad, you've never met Chris Larson. Chris Larson is a guy who had started Elon. He had started Prosper. And Chris is just an exceptionally good, and just the ability to see around corners and where the world's going is a talent. And really, he has way more vision around that than I do. And when I met with him, he kept talking about this thing, an internet of value. And I had, at that time, I had not heard that expression. And he was talking about like all the different ways that value movement has friction that we've become a little bit numb to. I mean, this is going to sound a little bit pedestrian, but like I have to take my credit card out of my pocket. I have to take my wallet out to pay for something, as opposed that's friction.
Yeah.
It's friction there. They're also taking, somewhere between 100 bips and in some countries 800 bips for the privilege of processing that credit card. And so he's talking about all the different points of friction where an internet of value, if it existed, it would unlock use cases we don't even think about. I'll share one that may never come to fruition, but I remember him kind of pontificating about this, and that why not a self-driving car? If we get to the point of truly self-driving cars, and I think that's not if, but when, why not be able to pass value to the car in front of you to get out of the way so you can go faster? You're in rush hour traffic and you want to go a little bit faster. You're willing to pay whatever amount, and you could even put into some sort of system. I'm willing to pay this much to go this fast, and it would moderate based upon that. You would pass value to the cars around you.
Fascinating.
Today, you can't do that unless you're pitching dimes into somebody's convertible, right? Like it's not even pragmatic.
Right. Yeah.
But you think about okay, in a internet of value, if value truly can move the way information moves today, okay. Now, look, there's a whole bunch of reasons why you could poke holes in that. That's never going to happen, and it creates weird incentives for going slow and getting paid to get out of the way, kind of thing. But he really kind of introduced this idea of this internet of value and how for that to exist, you need certain oil in that engine to grease the system so that it can work. And XRP, the digital asset that Ripple has kind of standardized on, if you will, extremely fast, extremely low cost, and it could be an interesting use case for that. So, I think there's going to be lots of cryptos that win. You and I have talked about that before. Yeah. I think there'll be different use cases and different protocols and different technologies that will win. But his vision and kind of what he talked about and bridging the kind of traditional financial world with this next generation, at the time we weren't calling it Web3, it really appealed to me. One last thing I'll say about this that I think is something I thought about. I don't think there's that many times in your life where you get to do something where you really can, to borrow a Steve Jobs expression, put a dent in the universe. There have been a couple of times in my career where I feel like I've had that opportunity, but it's pretty rare. It's pretty unique. And when I thought about what Ripple is trying to do, it's one of these kind of audacious things of like, okay, we're going to enable an internet of value. We're going to build systems to catalyze that future vision. It's definitely one of those things you're like, okay, if we do that, that's going to change the way some of these systems operate. And you're going to feel like, I helped put a dent in the universe. And there's something I find personally gratifying about that it's not in kind of as Elon Musk for him. I think it was about, as you described, like it's important work for the world.
Yeah.
I think if you can unlock an internet of value, it's going to change a lot about how some of these things work. And I mean, passing money for self-driving cars, okay. But, there's also an underserved community that is not connected to the traditional financial system that has, if they could connect, could derive value. And you're seeing some of that play out with microloans in less successful economies. And that is helping people. Like, yeah. I think that there is an element, if you can really do this at scale, there's a lot of benefits to society that I think we underappreciate right now.
That's a great way of putting it. You've been at this for 9 years now, right?
I just passed my 9th anniversary.
9 years in probably the most volatile industry we've ever seen. I'm curious for you, over that 9-year period, what has been the highest high and what's been the lowest low for you?
The highest high, which admittedly was in and of itself an emotional roller coaster, and I have a tattoo referencing it on my left shoulder. July 13th, 2023, the court decision was issued by Judge Torres in the United States versus Ripple, and I guess to some degree Brad Garlinghouse. I mean, there are 3 cases really: one against me, one against Chris, and one against Ripple. And look, I think there's so many things about this that made no sense from the beginning that you couldn't really understand. But, when your life is in the hands of a judge, you don't really know. I mean, I believed deeply that we were right, but that moment, learning that we had, from my point of view, won all the things that we cared about, frankly, not just for Ripple, but for the industry, that was a big moment. That was a big high. But even that moment was an emotional roller coaster. I actually don't mind sharing. I haven't shared this publicly. I broke down crying.
Wow.
And because it was definitely like the weight of it. All of a sudden it was like, oh my God, like, all of this energy, all this time, all this money
for
all
years,
this distraction. Oh yeah. Yeah. And so, I'll do the other, the lowest low, to some degree, December 22nd, 2020, which is the day they filed the lawsuit. Now, that wasn't the same because, when we won on July 13th, we didn't know the decision was coming out that day. I mean, it was definitely
out of the blue.
Yes. Yeah.
That's remarkable. I'm curious because, well, congrats on winning that. Power to the people here. I love it. But when that lawsuit was first filed, it's so tough because you have such conviction of the future and what you can do for the world. But then you have the SEC, you have other law institutions that it's completely up in the air whether or not you're able to do this. And then internally with your company, you've sold them on a vision, they're bought in, they know what the technology can do, but there's so many unknowns there. How do you keep your team engaged and convicted in the midst of so much uncertainty and chaos and persecution? Like, how do you keep the team together and charge forward to get where you are today through all that?
Yeah.